WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
U.S. Representative Glenn Grothman of Glenbeulah is the Republican candidate in the 6th Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Congressman Grothman, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Well, glad to be on here. It's been a while, but always fun.
Well, we appreciate having you.
We have a new wonderful replacement for Steve Walters, so that's tremendous.
That's good to hear. We want to know why you're running for this office. How would you describe your campaign's key message?
Well, the country's in a huge amount of trouble. I think things have only gotten worse the last 4 years. In part because of my committee, I've taken a huge interest in the southern border, right? We're in a situation now in which we have, about 3 million people coming across the southern border. And that's in addition to the over 800,000 people we have sworn in as new citizens every year. So we're getting a lot of people coming here illegally, but the number coming illegally is just out of control. I continue to worry about our welfare system. There are huge penalties in it for working more and huge penalties in it for getting married. I think I'm the one who talks about it more than anything. We've got concerns put into at least Republican versions of the bill, but if Donald Trump gets reelected, I really want to look at the marriage penalty associated with the welfare-related programs. And another thing that I think I'm bringing up a lot is concern about the diversity, equity, inclusion programs, which are dividing, I think, America. And I would say those are the three issues that I will be most associated with.
How do you see the state of the economy, and what legislation or policy would you propose to incentivize economic growth, specifically in our state, Wisconsin?
Well, the problem with the economy, and it affects everything. It affects housing, I think you're going to bring up later. It affects food. It affects energy, is the inflation. And it just has to be addressed, just blocking and tackling. You cannot spend so much money. So both discretionary spending and mandatory spending have to be addressed. We also have to open up more drilling and looking for energy in this country. Energy costs affect so much. They affect not only gas, but they affect plastics, manufacturing. And if we get those costs down, I think we'll get inflation under control.
You talk about government spending. What's an example of a specific area of discretionary spending that you would support cutting back on?
On discretionary spending, Department of Commerce. I think we could almost get rid of Department of Education. We could almost get rid of Department of Housing again. Really more of a state thing. You'll notice that the states lately have been running huge surpluses. And nevertheless, people coming into my office and saying, can we spend more money on this and spend more money on that? I think you ought to go to Madison. They're the ones with all the money. Not to mention under our Constitution, a lot of those things should really be dealt with by the states or county level.
I want to move on to child care. It's become increasingly expensive to raise a family. What policies do you support that make raising a family more affordable? And for instance, do you support a child tax credit or other policies that reduce the cost of child care?
I don't mind using the tax code to benefit people with children. Right now, a lot of the things in the tax code are kind of penalizing married couples, and I think we have to particularly focus there as far as making it easier to raise a family, just the inflation, right? I mean, what happened in the last 4 years is we passed 3 bills, all for over $1 trillion each, in addition to the regular budget, okay? And it was passed, sadly, by President Biden against the advice of some of President Obama's economic advisors. and that's what drove up inflation. If you get inflation back down, you're going to solve the problem. It's particularly horrible for young couples because they're going to want to buy a house. So they aren't locked into a low interest rate. And you're not going to get lower interest rates until you get maybe not a balanced budget, but closer to a balanced budget.
So do you support child care, expanding child care subsidies of any kind?
Largely child care is another a state function or a local government.
No action
function
at the federal level on child care subsidies?
I don't think any big new spending, because like I said, we've got to get the spending under control.
And in terms of a child care tax credit, at what amount might you support?
I'd rather see an increase in the standard exemption, that sort of thing.
Okay. You mentioned housing, the cost of housing, another big issue for Wisconsinites. What federal policies or legislation would you support that might lower the cost of housing, either for renters or home buyers?
Well, I think as you reduce the cost of energy, reduce the cost of housing, right? That's certainly a big one. Overall inflation, again, bring down the cost of housing, along with bringing down the cost of everything else.
I know some of our presidential candidates have weighed on this. Vice President Harris talking about a new $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers and some incentive money to build more affordable homes. Is that anything you can support?
Well, again, it's pretty expensive to give everybody $25,000. You know, it's a wonderful thing to talk about, but obviously you'd be really driving up the cost of things. One thing I'd like to do right now with regard to the GI Bill, that's aimed solely at education. And over time, you'd have to say, we really have too many people involved in maybe getting four-year degrees that don't help them. It might not be a bad idea to give our veterans, say, waive the GI Bill, and instead, I'm going to give you, let's say, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 towards a house if you waive it. And that would be a boost to our veterans as far as housing is concerned.
I know Social Security is an issue that you've worked on. It faces potential long-term financing shortfalls. What reforms to Social Security do you support?
I don't think we need big reforms in Social Security.
I've been very adamant. Not changing the age.
Right. No, I think that's ridiculous. And there are some people out there who say, oh, we ought to make it age 68, we ought to make age 70, I think that's a bunch of congressmen who can work when they're 70 years old. But there are a lot of people, you know, physically very difficult when you're 70 years old, and try to find a job when you're 68 years old. I know a lot of people who've been laid off in their 50s, laid off in their early 60s. Maybe they were making good money at that time, making 70 or 80 or $100,000 a year. But you look for a job when you're even 50 years old, much less 60 or 65. This idea of politicians saying people can work till they're 70, they're not in the real world.
What is the solution to solvency in Social Security?
Oh, you've got to put the money, first of all, you got to grow the economy, and secondly, you have to put money in from the general fund, I think.
I know that former President Trump has talked about reducing payments to providers or cutting taxes on Social Security.
Well, that's fine. I think, though, if you're looking for a solution on Social Security, the thing is to cut other parts of government. To me, the Social Security is a promise to everybody. You begin putting money into there when you're in your 20s or even in your teens, and that has to be the first draw on government spending, number one. So we can't cut it. We just have to begin to throw these other departments overboard to save Social Security for the seniors.
Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What are you planning to do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
Well, I'm glad with regard to pharmaceuticals that it's possible that Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to get involved here. I've read his book. I think it's a tremendous book. He really understands what it's going to take to get better pharmaceuticals and even more cheaper pharmaceuticals to people. That's a step in the right direction. When we do an overall overhaul, one of the things that individual businesses can do to keep an cost under control is they have on-site medical clinics. So unlike going to your big conglomerates they don't immediately direct you to specialists, which are so expensive. I think somehow we've got to find a way to duplicate that for groups of small businesses. Because like I said, between HSAs and on-site clinics and keeping track of or publicizing the cost at different providers, I think you could get, medical costs down 20, 30%. I think some businesses may be even higher than that, but somehow we have to duplicate that for everybody, not just for a few forward-looking companies that may already have 600 or 700 employees.
Do you support the ability of Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices then?
I think it would be a good idea.
Local communities in Wisconsin are faced with a growing number of issues. For example, issues related to water quality, PFAS, or a sudden influx of refugees like Wisconsin saw in 2021. How do you plan to collaborate with local governments to ensure that they have the necessary resources to address the local issues?
Again, I think that's largely a state issue, right? If people move here, unless it's a lot of illegal immigrants, but the way to deal with that is just not accept them in the first place. But otherwise, on a case-by-case basis, we may have some grants available on a federal level, but largely that's a state issue.
Are tax cuts or increases a focus of your campaign? For instance, do you support extending and making permanent the tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017?
I'd like us to aim more at manufacturing of all the types of businesses. Wisconsin's number one in manufacturing in the country, but even more than that, manufacturing is where your wealth comes from. You're not going to get your wealth from big box stores. You're not going to get your wealth from law firms. You get it from manufacturing. There was a time prior to the big Tax Cut Act of, 2017? Right, in which manufacturing was considered special and, as a practical matter, taxed at a lower rate. I'd like to see us go back to there because manufacturing is the one area we're competing with other companies abroad as well. So
do you support extending those 2017 tax cuts overall?
Yeah, but I wouldn't mind restructuring them and aiming more for manufacturing. I think one other thing that kind of distinguishes me from other people, I'd like to see what we could do about bringing back at least some of the employee business expense. A lot of times the focus has been on capital gains cuts, which is fine, but you wind up in a situation in which people are paying a lot less in taxes by investing and more in taxes for the working guy. I'm thinking particularly of people who have to pay for running around the country, maybe construction, that sort of thing. And I think we could raise taxes on interest for hedge fund managers. I mean, they're right now not paying enough tax. President Trump claimed he was going to address that in his first race. He didn't. But I'd like to see us come back. I mean, the idea that you're paying less tax as a hedge fund manager than an average guy is ridiculous.
Critics of the 2017 tax cuts say they add to the deficit, projected to cost an extra $3.8 trillion over the next decade. Is that something that concerns you? How would you address that?
Well, you've got the way to deal with the deficit, of course, is to get more revenue in, have the economy boom. You cannot have a tax code that penalizes companies for being here instead of abroad. One of the reasons the economy took off so much under President Trump was because of the tax cuts. So the idea is saying we're going to have some draconian corporate or otherwise tax rates is in the long run going to muck up the economy and I think to a degree slow down tax collections.
I know former President Trump has been talking about adding tariffs, increasing tariffs on foreign goods. Is that a good idea?
Depends on the goods, really. You got to be careful. I think when you add tariffs on things like, raw materials, you again can create a situation in which you're driving up the cost of goods for manufacturers in this country, and so you're helping the steel producers, but you're hurting the car manufacturers, that sort of thing.
Moving on to abortion policy, of course, a big issue. Should there be federal abortion policy passed by Congress, or should it be left up solely to states?
Well, I've signed on to bills in the past, but I think President Trump has largely taken that off the table, right? He's made it clear we're not going to have any abortion bills. If he's president, we're sure not going to have any abortion bills. If Kamala Harris is president, unless it's one of these draconian things where you require abortion to be legal through birth, which she supported in the past. I think that's kind of ghoulish. But I don't think it should be a big issue right now because President Trump has said even if he gets elected, he's not going to sign.
So you wouldn't
abortion.
vote for a federal abortion ban?
Oh, I'm on bills like that, but it's just irrelevant. It's not a relevant question because right now we have a presidential candidate who's not going to sign that sort of thing.
You've been talking about energy. What's your position on climate change, and what congressional actions do you support that balance people's environmental concerns with economic concerns and the need to have economic growth?
I don't think we have man-made, and I want to clarify on the abortion thing.
Sure.
I have been, very pro-life, certainly voted for a lot of pro-life issues. I'm just saying that for a voter this time around, President Trump has made it clear we're not going to do anything. Now, you mentioned
the energy policy, climate change.
Right. I think we need more energy here in this country. I think the transferring the cost of energy abroad, which President Biden has done in the name of climate, has been a big mistake. First of all, it's just a stronger economy in this country, right, if we're drilling for our own oil, producing our own natural gas. And that will also drive down the cost of energy internationally. And right now, the beneficiaries of not doing things in the United States, driving up costs, in addition to your average, homeowner worried about energy costs, another huge beneficiary is Iran and Russia and Venezuela, countries that I don't know why we're helping, but they're getting all this additional money in because the U.S. is not producing enough energy. If we produce more, the cost would go down for everybody.
Do you support incentives for renewable energy development?
I think we have enough incentives already. A lot of those come in the form of tax credits. I think a lot of those tax credits can disappear. You mentioned what are we going to do, to increase tax collections, and I think some of those tax credits, a lot of those tax credits, which benefit wealthy companies or wealthy individuals, should be set aside.
On renewable energy. Should the U.S. continue to provide military support for Ukraine, and should there be any conditions for how long?
Well, I've been very critical of the way they're going about things. Every war has got to end. The Korean War ended. The Korean War ended, and Eisenhower and his people negotiated with Mao Zedong, one of the worst mass murders in history. If you talk to the Biden administration, they don't have a plan or appear to desire to end this war. Now, both countries should want to end the war. Ukraine's got the second lowest birth rate in the world compared to any country but South Korea. They cannot afford to lose any more young people. Russia also has a low birth rate and have had a lot of people emigrate from Russia. So I think both countries should want to end the war, but for whatever motivation, President Biden and his team, who I've talked to, never talks about how this thing is going to end.
So you think Ukraine should negotiate with Russia?
Absolutely. And I think we should be involved. If we are not trusted as a good negotiator, maybe the French, maybe the Turks, maybe the Israelis.
How should the U.S. be balancing support for Israel with concerns over civilian casualties in Gaza and the Israel-Hamas?
Well, I don't know why the focus is on Israel there. To me, the focus should be on Hamas. They're the ones who started the war. Anytime they could say, here are your, whatever we have, 100 new hostages left. We're going to lay down our weapons. We're going to show you where all our tunnels are. And the war would be over next week. Instead, they focus on Israel like they're a problem. I don't think the problem is Israel. I mean, the war was started by Hamas. The war can be ended by Hamas. And leaning on Israel to say you just have to accept what would amount to a Hamas victory to a degree is ridiculous.
Should there be any conditions on military support we provide to Israel?
Well, I think there might be some, like secret weapons or highly technical weapons, but in general, no. I think, we want Israel to win that war, and the sooner they win it, the better. And not to mention, they don't have to win it there. They have to win it to a degree to which they don't have to worry about Hezbollah coming across their northern border in Lebanon, where they have just a fantastic number of missiles there.
I want to transition to campaign spending. We have a couple questions on this. Are you troubled by the record-breaking amounts of out-of-state money being solicited by Wisconsin campaign operatives to influence our local elections?
Yeah, it's a scary thing. We have a First Amendment, but I think I have won many races. My major wins in my political career, I've always been outspent. So you can always win a race despite being outspent. On the other hand, I know in Washington, the Republicans, I don't want to use the word panicking, but of course for quite a while now, the Democrats have a huge fundraising advantage. They have a huge fundraising advantage now, and I know when I get back to Washington next week, we're going to be told we have to raise more money because the Democrats are, it's not unusual in a U.S. Senate race. The Republicans are maybe $30-40 million behind the Democrats. And it is because the wildly wealthy, I think, are backing the Democrats right now, and it is a concern. I think part of the way to do this is deal with it. I bet the average American does not know how much the Democrats are outspending Republicans now.
A lot of money is also being spent on broadcast, streaming negative attack ads, many of which walk a fine line in terms of accuracy versus exaggeration. At a time when the nation is so divided, how do you respond to a Wisconsin voter who might ask you to stop using negative ads?
Well, we have a First Amendment, so we can't stop using negative ads. I don't think negative ads are helpful. I have no intention to running negative ads in this campaign. I think sometimes people turn on them. Though I will say the reason people use them is they're effective. And I hate to say it, people complain about I hate negative ads, and then the professionals who do this stuff say, yeah, well, they work.
Do they fuel more discord and divide in our country?
Pardon?
Do they fuel more discord and divide?
I think the divide is caused by the policies that and I don't mean to be partisan here, that the Democrat Party is using. You have people streaming across the border, you have this inflation, you have this appeal to racial divide. I think that's where the problem is coming from.
You've served on the House Committee on Education and Workforce and have been involved in education throughout your career. The number of Wisconsin school districts going to referendum asking local taxpayers for funding is increasing. Is there a need to increase federal spending on K-12 public education?
No. I mean, when the federal government gets involved, it means you got federal control. Like right now, the Biden administration is using those dollars to force local school districts to allow, say, transgender boys into a girls' locker room. Now, that's ridiculous for any school district to do it, but to have the federal government weigh in and say, if some guy wants to be the cool guy and say I'm transgender and I get to walk in the girls' bathroom, that's ridiculous. And that's a perfect example why you don't want more federal involvement in education.
Do you support federal student loan forgiveness?
No. A, we're broke. And B, it's unfair to the people who, let's say you don't go to college or maybe you go to trade school, which a lot of times is a good pick. Why, if I know someone who's a plumber who didn't go to a 4-year college, who's rang up the $50,000 debt, why do I as a plumber have to pay that off? Or why, if I'm somebody who paid off my own student loan debt, and there are people who may take 2 or 3 jobs, pay off that student loan debt like that, and now all of a sudden they've got to chip in and pay for somebody else. It's really not right. I do think we ought to be more aggressive in preventing them from being such high student loans in the first place. Maybe cap the amount of loans you can take out if you go to graduate school where things really get out of line, or we can require a little more information be given by 4-year colleges before people take out these maximums.
You mentioned border security as a priority for you at the beginning of our interview. I'd like to ask you, what would you focus on in an effort to fix what many feel is a broken immigration system?
Well, I think it has to be more merit-based. We want good people to come here, not everybody. And like I said, right now, every year, 850, 900,000 people are sworn in legally as new citizens. Nobody ever talks about that. I think that program is working pretty good. I mean,
should there be changes to the asylum process?
I think too many people are getting here on asylum. I think we have to make sure that when people come in here on asylum, they really need it and have to come to the United States, right? If somebody is in Colombia and wants to come here for asylum, well, why isn't somebody from Colombia, or say Brazil, a better example, Brazil. Why isn't somebody from Brazil coming to Colombia or coming to Argentina or coming to Uruguay, a country much closer to them than the U.S. When all these people are coming to the U.S. saying, I claim asylum, well, I don't think you're coming here just to escape your homeland. You're coming here for the better economic opportunity, which eventually will ruin the U.S.
What should U.S. policy be for undocumented immigrants?
Well, I think they should be turned around and sent back home.
Deported.
Right.
Final two questions.
Oh, wow, we're going to get done in time.
We are going to get done in time. What's the biggest difference between you and your opponent?
I think, well, I guess on the border, and of course I don't know all what he stands for, but I think on the border the system is currently broken. You said you asked for two?
If you think that's your biggest one?
I think one thing that is a big deal is there's an act called the PRO Act, which if he gets in there, I assume he's for, all the other Democrats are, which would require union vote with 14 days notice, which I think is unfair, requiring giving over every employee's address, email address, and phone number, and you begin to have union elections held with require that election held open ballot so people can see how you're voting, which would be a big problem. And on welfare, which is my signature issue, I definitely think the current welfare system is eroding the American family and eroding the American work ethic. I would be surprised if my opponent would do anything about that.
Final question. Given the steep partisan divide nationally, what's one issue you think has the potential to be resolved that could actually bring parties together?
Well, it's a little bit misleading. We get along. I bet every week when I'm in Washington, we probably pass 15 to 20, maybe 30 bills that are largely bipartisan. So, you know, these are small problems, but their problems can be addressed. In the past, I have been the lead, along with Chuy Garcia of Illinois, in trying to get rid of these excessive interest rates that people are paying. I think that's an example of something that we could solve together.
Well, thank you, U.S. Representative Glenn Grothman of Glenbeulah, Republican candidate running for re-election in the 6th Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Congressman Grothman, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
We love to be on WisconsinEye.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.